My son's wife demanded $500,000 from me, claiming it was rightfully theirs. When I refused, she threatened to destroy our family. But when I opened that mysterious envelope from my late wife's attorney, everything changed. The tables turned so fast that Ashley wished she'd never knocked on my door. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn rain drummed against my kitchen window as I stirred my morning coffee, the same ceramic mug Helen had given me for our 20th anniversary. Steam rose from the dark liquid, carrying the familiar aroma that somehow made the empty house feel less hollow. 3 years had passed since Helen's funeral at St. Mary's, but I still made 2 cups out of habit before catching myself and pouring the second one back. The silence was interrupted by my doorbell, its chime echoing through rooms that had grown too quiet since retirement. Through the frosted glass, I could see 2 figures standing on my front porch. My pulse quickened when I recognized David's tall frame, though something about his posture suggested this wasn't a casual visit. Ashley stood beside him, her designer handbag clutched tightly against her chest, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the morning light despite the overcast sky. I opened the door to find my son avoiding eye contact, his hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. Ashley, however, looked directly at me with those calculating blue eyes that had never quite warmed to me, not even during their wedding 4 years ago. Her smile was sharp and practiced, the kind she wore when she wanted something expensive. "Hi, Dad," David said, his voice strained. "We need to talk to you about something important." "Of course. Come in." I stepped aside, gesturing toward the living room where Helen's reading chair still held her favorite throw pillow. "Can I get you some coffee?" "This won't take long," Ashley said, settling onto the couch with the confidence of someone who believed they held all the cards. David remained standing by the fireplace, studying Helen's collection of porcelain birds as if seeing them for the first time. The atmosphere in the room shifted, becoming heavy with unspoken tension. I'd felt this before, during those difficult conversations about David's college expenses, his wedding costs, and the down payment I'd helped them make on their first apartment. Each time, Ashley had been the driving force behind the requests, while David played the reluctant messenger. "Dad, we've been thinking about our future," David began, finally turning to face me. "Ashley and I have some incredible opportunities ahead of us, but we need capital to make them happen." I settled into my recliner, the one Helen had insisted we buy after my back surgery 2 years ago. The leather was still stiff, not yet broken in like the old chair I'd used for 30 years. "What kind of opportunities?" Ashley leaned forward, her manicured hands clasped together. "Robert, you've been so generous over the years, helping us get established. Now we're ready to take the next big step." The way she said my name with that honeyed tone she reserved for serious requests made my stomach tighten. I learned to recognize the signs over the years, the careful preamble that preceded another financial demand. "Ashley found this amazing investment property," David said, warming to the subject despite his obvious discomfort. "It's a duplex in downtown Columbus, already has tenants, guaranteed income stream." "The numbers are incredible, Robert," Ashley added, pulling out her phone to show me screenshots of property listings. "We're talking about real wealth building here, not just paycheck-to-paycheck living." I asked, though something in Ashley's expression told me I already knew the answer wouldn't be pleasant. $500,000, she said without hesitation, as if discussing the weather. "It's a steal at that price, but we need to move quickly. The seller has other interested buyers." The number hit me like cold water. $500,000. More money than I'd ever seen in one place. More than Helen and I had saved over 4 decades of careful budgeting and sacrifice. My pension covered my modest needs, but $500,000 represented everything I had left for emergencies, medical expenses, or the possibility of eventually needing assisted care. "Ashley, I began, but she cut me off with a wave of her hand. "I know it sounds like a lot, but think about what this could mean for David's future, for our children's future." She placed her hand on David's arm possessively. We're not getting any younger, and opportunities like this don't come along often." David shifted uncomfortably, his gaze moving between his wife and me. "Dad, I know it's a big ask, but Ashley's done all the research. This could set us up for life." I looked at my son, this man I'd raised from a boy who used to help me rewire electrical outlets and fix broken appliances. Somewhere along the way, that curious, hard-working kid had been replaced by someone who saw his aging father as a source of funding rather than family. "Where would this money come from?" I asked carefully. "Well, you have Helen's life insurance policy," Ashley said, consulting notes on her phone, "plus your retirement accounts, and this house must be worth at least $300,000 by now." The casual way she discussed liquidating everything Helen and I had built together made my hands tremble. She'd clearly researched my finances, calculated my worth like I was an asset to be leveraged rather than a person with his own needs and future to consider. "You want me to sell my home?" The question came out quieter than I'd intended. "Not necessarily," David said quickly, shooting Ashley a warning look. "We just need access to the capital. You could take out a home equity loan or maybe liquidate some investments." Ashley nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly, and once the property starts generating income, we'll pay you back with interest. Think of it as a family investment, Robert. We're all in this together." I stood up slowly, my arthritic knees protesting after sitting in the same position too long. Walking to the window, I looked out at the street where Helen and I had lived for over 40 years. Frank Williams was checking his mailbox across the way, probably collecting his Social Security check and pension statements. Dorothy Kim was tending to her fall flowers, preparing her garden for the coming winter. These were my neighbors, my community, the people who'd supported me through Helen's illness and death. This house held memories of birthday parties and Christmas mornings, of David's childhood and Helen's final days. The idea of losing it to fund Ashley's get-rich-quick scheme felt like betraying everything Helen and I had worked for. "I need to think about this," I said, turning back to face them. Ashley's smile faltered for the first time since she'd arrived. "Think about what? This is family, Robert. When family needs help, you help. That's how it works." $500,000 isn't help, Ashley. It's everything I have. "Everything you have that you're not even using," she shot back, her tone turning sharp. "You're sitting in this big house all alone, hoarding money while your son struggles to build a future." David looked embarrassed by his wife's directness, but he didn't contradict her. That silence spoke volumes about where his loyalties lay. "I'm not hoarding anything," I said firmly. "This is my security, my insurance against whatever the future might bring." Ashley stood up abruptly, her patience clearly exhausted. "Your future? Robert, you're 72 years old. How much future do you think you have left?" The cruelty of her words hung in the air like smoke. David's face went pale, but still he said nothing in my defense.
"Ashley, that's enough," I said, my voice carrying the authority I'd once used to manage construction crews. "No, it's not enough," she continued, her mask of politeness completely discarded now. "David deserves better than having to beg his own father for help. We're not asking for charity, we're asking for family support." I walked to the front door and opened it wide, letting the cold October air sweep into the room. "I think you should leave now." Ashley gathered her purse, her face flushed with anger. "Fine, but don't come crying to us when you're old and sick and need somewhere to live. Don't expect David to take care of you when you couldn't be bothered to help him when he needed it most." David followed her toward the door, pausing to look back at me with something that might have been regret. "Dad, just think about it, okay? This could really change our lives." "I already am thinking about it," I said. "I'm thinking about how quickly you're both willing to sacrifice my security for your ambitions."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. After they left, I stood in my empty living room, listening to their car disappear down Maple Street. The house felt different now. Not just quiet, but somehow violated by their demands and threats. Helen's photograph smiled at me from the mantel, and I found myself talking to her as I often did when the loneliness became overwhelming. They want everything, Helen. Every dollar we saved, every sacrifice we made, as if 45 years of work means nothing. The phone rang later that evening, David's number appearing on the caller ID. I let it go to voicemail, not ready for another round of manipulation disguised as family obligation. When I finally listened to the message, his voice was pleading and desperate. "Dad, please don't be angry with Ashley. She's just passionate about our future. We really need this opportunity. Call me back when you're ready to talk reasonably about this." Reasonably. As if I was the one being unreasonable for refusing to impoverish myself to fund their dreams. I deleted the message and unplugged the phone, needing silence to process what had happened and decide what came next. That night, I sat in Helen's sewing room, surrounded by her fabric collection and half-finished quilts. The room still smelled faintly of her lavender perfume, and I could almost feel her presence in the organized chaos of pins and patterns. She would have known exactly what to do about David and Ashley. Helen had always been better at reading people, at seeing through manipulation and standing her ground when necessary. As I prepared for bed, climbing the creaky third step that Helen had always meant to have fixed, I made a decision. Tomorrow, I would call Patricia Morgan, the attorney who'd handled Helen's estate. If David and Ashley wanted to play hardball with family finances, they were about to learn that this old electrician had a few tools of his own. The morning came with harsh clarity, sunlight streaming through my bedroom curtains and illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny accusations. I'd barely slept, my mind churning through Ashley's demands and David's silent complicity. The coffee tasted bitter as I sat at my kitchen table, staring at Patricia Morgan's business card that I'd retrieved from Helen's address book. Patricia had been Helen's choice when we'd updated our wills 5 years ago. A sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who'd guided us through the maze of estate planning with patience and precision. She'd handled Helen's affairs after her death with the kind of compassionate efficiency that made difficult times bearable. If anyone could help me understand my legal position regarding Ashley's financial ambitions, it would be Patricia. The law office occupied a converted Victorian house in downtown Riverside's historic district, its burgundy shutters and wraparound porch lending an air of old-fashioned respectability to serious business. Patricia greeted me in her wood-paneled conference room, her silver hair pulled back in the same neat bun she'd worn during all our previous meetings. Her handshake was firm, her smile genuine but professional. "Robert, it's wonderful to see you, though I suspect this isn't a social call." She gestured to the leather chair across from her mahogany desk, the same seat where Helen and I had signed our final documents together. "What can I help you with?" I explained the previous day's confrontation, watching Patricia's expression grow increasingly concerned as I detailed Ashley's demands and her casual assessment of my assets. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled as she processed what I had told her. $500,000, she repeated slowly. "Robert, that represents nearly everything you have, doesn't it? Everything and more. I'd have to liquidate my retirement accounts, take penalties, maybe even mortgage the house." The words felt heavy in my mouth, each one representing years of careful saving and planning. Patricia opened a thick file folder, Helen's estate documents visible on top. "Let me refresh my memory about your current financial position." She reviewed several pages before looking up at me with concern. "Robert, what Ashley is asking for would leave you financially vulnerable. At your age, rebuilding those assets would be virtually impossible." That's what I tried to tell them, but Ashley seemed to think I was being selfish. She said families should help family. Family support and financial exploitation are two different things. Patricia's voice carried the authority of someone who'd seen too many elderly clients pressured by relatives. Has Ashley provided you with documentation about this investment property? Inspection reports, financial statements, proof of existing tenants? I shook my head. Just photos on her phone and her assurance that it was a guaranteed moneymaker. Patricia's frown deepened. Robert, I've been practicing law for 30 years, and I've never seen a guaranteed real estate investment, especially not one requiring immediate cash and promising quick returns. These are classic red flags. Her words confirmed the nagging suspicion that had kept me awake most of the night. Ashley's pitch had sounded too good to be true because it probably was. What should I do? First, you should know that you have no legal obligation to provide this money. Family relationships don't create binding financial duties beyond what parents owe minor children. Patricia pulled out a legal pad and began making notes. Second, if you're curious about this property, we could have it investigated. A good private investigator could verify Ashley's claims about tenants, condition, and market value within a week. The idea of hiring someone to check up on my daughter-in-law felt strange, almost disloyal. But Ashley had made this a business transaction the moment she'd calculated my net worth like a balance sheet. How much would that cost? A few $100s, much less than $500,000, and it might save you from making the biggest financial mistake of your life. Patricia's tone was gentle but firm. Robert, I've seen too many seniors lose their security because they couldn't say no to family members who viewed them as ATM machines rather than people deserving respect and protection. I authorized the investigation, providing Patricia with what little information I had about the Columbus property. As I prepared to leave, she mentioned something that stopped me cold. Robert, there is one other matter we should discuss. When Helen's estate was settled, there was an item she left specific instructions about. A sealed envelope that was to be given to you only if you ever felt threatened or financially pressured by family members. My heart skipped a beat. Helen had always been protective of our financial security, sometimes to the point where I'd teased her about being overly cautious. But she'd also been intuitive about people, especially Ashley, whose charm had never quite convinced my wife. An envelope? What kind of envelope? I don't know. Helen sealed it herself and gave it to me with very specific instructions about when it should be opened. She was quite insistent that it not be given to you unless certain circumstances arose.
Patricia walked to her safe, a massive black box that dominated one corner of the office. She said, and I quote, "If anyone ever tries to take everything Robert and I worked for, he'll need what's in here." The envelope was cream-colored, business-sized, with Helen's careful handwriting across the front. For Robert, if our security is threatened by those who should protect it. My name was underlined twice, and the flap was secured with red wax, stamped with Helen's initial. "She planned for this," I whispered, turning the envelope over in my hands. It felt substantial, containing more than just a letter. Helen was one of the most foresighted clients I've ever had. She seemed to anticipate problems long before they materialized. Patricia returned to her desk, giving me privacy to process this unexpected development. She specifically mentioned concerns about Ashley's spending habits and David's inability to stand up to his wife's demands. I slipped the envelope into my jacket pocket, its weight feeling both comforting and ominous. Helen had known, somehow, that this day would come. Even from beyond the grave, she was still protecting me, still thinking ahead to problems I hadn't seen coming. Walking home through Riverside's tree-lined streets, I felt the envelope pressing against my chest like a talisman. Frank Williams waved from his front yard where he was raking the first fallen leaves of autumn. Dorothy Kim called out a greeting as she returned from her morning walk. These people had been my neighbors for decades, had attended Helen's funeral, had brought casseroles and companionship during my darkest months. They represented stability, community, the life Helen and I had built together. Ashley wanted me to risk all of it for her get-rich-quick scheme? Back home, I sat in Helen's sewing room, surrounded by her quilting supplies and the half-finished projects she'd never had time to complete. The afternoon light streaming through the windows illuminated fabric squares in shades of blue and yellow, Helen's favorite colors. I held the envelope up to the light, trying to discern its contents without breaking the seal. What had Helen discovered or suspected about Ashley? What information had she thought important enough to hide away for 3 years, waiting for the right moment to be revealed? The phone rang, jarring me from my speculation. David's number appeared on the caller ID, and after a moment's hesitation, I answered. "Dad, have you thought about what we discussed yesterday?" His voice sounded strained, as if he'd been arguing with someone recently. "I've thought about little else, David." "And?" "Ashley's getting pressure from the sellers. They want an answer by Friday, or the deal goes to someone else." The artificial urgency was another red flag Patricia had mentioned. Legitimate real estate transactions didn't usually come with such tight deadlines, especially for cash purchases. "David, have you actually seen this property in person?" A pause. "Well, Ashley's handled most of the research. She's got the real estate background." "What real estate background?" "Ashley worked in marketing before you got married." Another, longer pause. "Dad, she's been studying real estate investment. She knows what she's talking about." The defensiveness in his voice told me everything I needed to know. David was as much in the dark about this deal as I was, but he was committed to supporting his wife's version of events regardless of the facts. "I need more information before I make any decisions. Financial records, inspection reports, proof of rental income." "Dad, by the time we get all that paperwork, the opportunity will be gone. Sometimes you have to trust family and take a leap of faith." Trust family. The words that Ashley had used yesterday, now coming from David's mouth like a rehearsed script. "David, this isn't a leap of faith. It's asking me to risk everything I have on Ashley's assurance that she knows what she's doing." "Fine." His voice turned cold, distant. "I told Ashley you'd probably say no. I told her you'd never really supported my dreams or my marriage."
I'd supported David's education, helped with his wedding expenses, provided emotional support during his job changes and career uncertainty. But apparently, anything short of complete financial capitulation was now characterized as lack of support. "David, I've always supported your dreams. But this isn't your dream, is it? This is Ashley's get-rich-quick scheme, and she's using you to manipulate me into funding it." The line went dead. I sat holding the silent phone, feeling the weight of Helen's envelope in my pocket. My son had just hung up on me rather than address the uncomfortable truth about his wife's manipulations. The boy who used to build model airplanes with me in the garage, who'd called me his hero after I'd rewired our entire house during a power outage, was now treating me like an obstacle to be overcome, rather than a father deserving respect. That evening, Frank Williams knocked on my door with a bottle of beer and an expression of concern. We sat on my front porch, watching the sunset paint the quiet street in shades of gold and amber. "Bob, I hope you don't mind me saying, but Dorothy and I couldn't help noticing the tension when David and his wife visited yesterday. Everything all right?" Frank had been my neighbor for 20 years, had helped me carry Helen to the ambulance during her final illness, had checked on me daily during the weeks after her funeral. If anyone deserved an honest answer, it was Frank. They want me to give them $500,000 for some investment scheme. When I said I needed to think about it, Ashley got hostile and David got manipulative. Frank whistled low. $500,000? Bob, that's everything you've got." "That's what I told them. But Ashley seems to think I'm being selfish by not liquidating my entire life savings for their benefit." "That girl's always been trouble," Frank said, his usual diplomacy abandoned. "Helen saw it from day one. Said that one would spend money like water and expect everyone else to bail her out when the well ran dry. Helen's insight, even then, had been more accurate than I'd wanted to admit. She'd tried to warn me about Ashley's character, but I'd dismissed her concerns as natural mother-in-law protectiveness. Now, sitting with her envelope in my pocket and my son's anger fresh in my memory, I wondered what other warnings Helen had tried to give me that I'd been too optimistic to hear. "Frank, what would you do in my position?" The older man sipped his beer thoughtfully before answering. "Bob, I've got 3 kids and 7 grandchildren, and I love them all dearly. But love doesn't mean stupidity. If one of my kids asked me to risk my security for their get-rich-quick scheme, I'd tell them exactly what you should tell David and Ashley. Get your own money." Later that night, alone in my study, I finally broke the red wax seal on Helen's envelope. The envelope contained 3 items that changed everything I thought I knew about my family situation. First, a handwritten letter in Helen's familiar script, dated just 2 weeks before her death. Second, a thick manila folder filled with photocopied documents and bank statements. Third, a small digital recorder with a note attached reading, "Play this first, my darling Robert." My hands trembled as I pressed the play button, and Helen's voice filled the quiet study, clear and strong despite her illness. The sound of her speaking again after 3 years of silence brought tears to my eyes before I even heard her words. "Robert, if you're listening to this, it means Ashley has finally shown her true colors and tried to take everything we worked for. I hoped I was wrong about her, but I've been watching, and I've been documenting what I've seen. What I'm about to tell you will be hard to hear, but you need to know the truth about the woman David married." I paused the recording, needing a moment to process Helen's matter-of-fact tone. She'd known this day would come with the certainty of someone who'd studied Ashley's character far more carefully than I'd realized. Taking a deep breath, I pressed play again. I hired a private investigator 6 months ago when I noticed some troubling patterns. Ashley's spending habits, her attitude toward money, and most importantly, the lies she's been telling David about her background. Robert, Ashley has never worked in marketing. She was fired from 3 different retail jobs for theft. She has over $60,000 in credit card debt that David doesn't know about, and she's been forging documents to hide it from him. The words hit me like physical blows. Helen's voice continued, methodical and precise, laying out a case against Ashley that painted her not just as manipulative, but as genuinely dangerous to our family's financial security. The investigator found out that Ashley has been planning to divorce David as soon as she can get her hands on significant assets. She's been consulting with divorce attorneys, asking about claiming community property rights to money David might inherit from us. Robert, she married our son for his inheritance, and now that I'm dying, she's positioning herself to take everything. I stopped the recording again, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in the silent room. The woman who'd sat in my living room, demanding $500,000, wasn't just greedy or entitled. She was executing a calculated plan to steal everything Helen and I had built over 4 decades of marriage. The manila folder contained bank statements showing Ashley's hidden debt, credit reports revealing a pattern of financial irresponsibility going back years, and photographs of Ashley meeting with a man the investigator had identified as a divorce attorney specializing in high-asset cases. The documentation was thorough, damning, and absolutely heartbreaking. Helen's letter expanded on the recording's revelations. Her handwriting, though weakened by illness, remained precise and determined. "My dearest Robert, I know this information will hurt you because it means our David has been deceived by someone who never loved him. But I also know you're strong enough to use this knowledge to protect yourself and our son from a woman who sees both of you as resources to be exploited rather than people deserving love and respect. The money she's demanding from you isn't for any investment property. According to my investigator, it's to pay off her secret debts and fund her divorce proceedings against David. She plans to take half of whatever money you give them, claim it as marital property, and leave David with nothing but the responsibility for debts he didn't even know existed. The cruelty of Ashley's scheme was breathtaking in its calculated coldness. She'd married David knowing she intended to divorce him, had been lying about her background and finances for years, and was now trying to manipulate me into funding her escape plan while destroying both my security and my son's future. Helen's letter concluded with specific instructions that demonstrated her continued protective love even from beyond the grave. Robert, I've already arranged for Patricia Morgan to help you when this day comes. She has copies of all this evidence and knows exactly what steps to take to protect you legally. Don't confront Ashley directly until you've spoken with Patricia about the best way to handle this situation. Ashley is desperate and cornered, which makes her dangerous. Protect yourself first, then save our son from the mistake he doesn't even know he's made. I sat in Helen's sewing room until nearly midnight, reading through every document, listening to the recording twice more, and trying to process the magnitude of Ashley's deception. The woman who demanded $500,000 from me that morning wasn't just entitled or manipulative. She was a predator who targeted my family with the precision of a professional con artist. The next morning brought another aggressive phone call from David, his voice sharp with frustration and Ashley's influence clear in every word he spoke. "Dad, we need an answer today. The sellers won't wait any longer, and Ashley says if we lose this opportunity because of your selfishness, she's going to reconsider whether she wants to be part of this family at all."
The threat was Ashley's, delivered through David's mouth, designed to pressure me into immediate compliance before I could think too clearly about the situation. But Helen's evidence had armed me with knowledge that transformed Ashley's manipulation from frightening to pathetic. David, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. How well do you really know Ashley's financial background? What kind of question is that? I know my own wife, Dad. Do you know about her credit card debt? Do you know she's never actually worked in marketing? Do you know she's been meeting with divorce attorneys? The silence that followed was long and heavy, filled with the sound of David's world beginning to crumble as the truth forced its way through Ashley's carefully constructed lies. Dad, what are you talking about? Where are you getting this information? From your mother, David. Helen investigated Ashley before she died, and she left me evidence of everything she discovered. Your wife isn't who you think she is, and this investment scheme isn't what she's claiming it to be. You're lying. David's voice cracked with desperation. Mom never said anything to me about Ashley. You're making this up to avoid helping us. Your mother tried to protect you by handling this quietly, but she made sure I'd have the truth when Ashley finally showed her hand. David, she's planning to divorce you and take half of whatever money I give you. The investment property doesn't exist. She needs the money to pay off secret debts and fund her divorce proceedings. The phone went silent, except for David's labored breathing. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. Prove it. Come to the house tonight at 7 o'clock. Come alone, without Ashley, and I'll show you everything your mother discovered. But David, you need to prepare yourself for some very painful truths about the woman you married. After hanging up, I called Patricia Morgan's office and arranged an emergency meeting. Helen's evidence needed to be formally documented and prepared for whatever legal action might become necessary. If Ashley was as dangerous as Helen believed, having official legal protection would be crucial for both David and me. Patricia reviewed Helen's investigation with the grim satisfaction of someone whose professional instincts had been validated. The private investigator Helen had hired was one Patricia knew and trusted, someone whose work would hold up in court if necessary. Robert, this is one of the most thorough fraud investigations I've ever seen. Helen didn't just suspect Ashley was lying about her background, she proved it with documentation that would convince any judge or jury. Patricia organized the evidence into neat stacks, each category of deception clearly labeled and cross-referenced. The credit card debt alone is enough to explain Ashley's desperation for immediate cash, but the divorce consultation records show premeditation that elevates this to criminal fraud territory. What exactly has Ashley done that's criminal? Marriage fraud, for starters. She married David under false pretenses, hiding massive debt and lying about her background. The fact that she was already planning the divorce before the wedding makes it clear she intended to defraud both David and your family from the beginning. Patricia pulled out a legal pad and began making notes. If she succeeds in getting money from you through false pretenses, that's additional theft and fraud charges. The legal terminology felt strange applied to my daughter-in-law, but Ashley had crossed the line from difficult family member to actual criminal the moment she decided to build her marriage on lies designed to steal from her husband and his family. What happens now? Now we wait to see how Ashley reacts when David confronts her with the truth. If she admits the deception and agrees to leave quietly, we might be able to resolve this without criminal charges. If she doubles down on her lies or becomes threatening, we'll need to involve law enforcement.
That evening, David arrived at my house looking haggard and confused, his usual confidence replaced by the uncertain demeanor of someone whose world was shifting beneath his feet. He sat in the same chair where Ashley had made her demands just 2 days earlier, but now he seemed smaller, more vulnerable, more like the son I remembered from his childhood. I handed him Helen's letter first, watching his face as he read his mother's careful documentation of his wife's deception. His hands shook as he turned the pages, his expression cycling through disbelief, anger, and finally a terrible understanding of how completely he'd been manipulated. "She lied about everything," he whispered, looking up at me with eyes that held the pain of profound betrayal. "Dad, I thought I knew her. I thought we were building a life together." "I know, son. Your mother knew how much this would hurt you, but she also knew you deserved to know the truth before Ashley could destroy your future completely." David listened to Helen's recording with tears streaming down his face, hearing his mother's voice again while learning that his marriage had been a fraud from the beginning. When the recording ended, he sat in stunned silence for several minutes before finding his voice again. "What do I do now? How do I face her knowing what I know?" The question carried the weight of a man whose entire adult life had just been revealed as built on lies. But it also carried something else that gave me hope. For the first time in years, David was asking for my guidance instead of demanding my resources. First, we protect you legally. Then we confront Ashley together with witnesses and evidence she can't deny or manipulate. Your mother left us the tools to save you from this situation, David. We just need to use them wisely. Outside, autumn rain began pattering against the windows of the house where David had grown up, where Helen had planned and plotted to protect her family even after death, where the truth was finally coming to light after years of carefully constructed deception. David stayed at my house that night, sleeping in his old bedroom for the first time since his wedding 4 years ago. The next morning, he sat at my kitchen table nursing a cup of coffee and looking like he'd aged a decade overnight. The evidence of Ashley's deception lay spread across the table between us, each document a reminder of how thoroughly she'd manipulated everyone involved. "I keep thinking about all the signs I missed," David said, his voice hoarse from a sleepless night. "The expensive clothes she claimed were gifts from friends, the credit cards she said were for building her credit score, the way she always changed the subject when I asked about her work history." I poured myself another cup of coffee, giving David space to process the magnitude of his situation. Patricia Morgan had called early that morning to confirm our appointment for 10 o'clock, where we discussed the best strategy for confronting Ashley with the evidence of her fraud. "Dad, I need to know something. Did you ever suspect what she was really like?" The question was painful because the honest answer reflected poorly on my judgment as much as David's. I thought she was materialistic and self-centered, but I never imagined she was capable of this level of deception. Your mother saw through her much more clearly than I did. Why didn't Mom say anything to me directly? I selected my words carefully, remembering Helen's recorded explanation of her decision to investigate quietly rather than confront Ashley openly. She tried to drop hints about Ashley's character, but you were so happy in those early months of marriage that she didn't want to destroy your joy based on suspicions alone. She decided to gather proof first, so that when Ashley finally revealed her true nature, you'd have the evidence needed to protect yourself. David nodded slowly, understanding his mother's protective instinct, even as he grappled with the pain of knowing his marriage had been built on lies from the beginning. What happens when we confront Ashley today? What if she denies everything?
Then we show her the evidence until she can't deny it anymore. Your mother made sure we'd have everything needed to prove Ashley's deception beyond any reasonable doubt. Patricia's office felt different that morning, charged with the energy of impending confrontation rather than quiet legal consultation. She'd arranged the evidence in a presentation format, each category of Ashley's deception clearly documented and cross-referenced with supporting materials. Gentlemen, based on what Helen uncovered, we have sufficient evidence to pursue criminal charges against Ashley for marriage fraud, identity theft, and attempted theft by deception. However, before involving law enforcement, I recommend giving her the opportunity to leave quietly and dissolve the marriage without contest. David looked uncomfortable with the criminal implications of his wife's behavior. Is there any chance this is all a misunderstanding? Maybe Ashley made some mistakes but didn't intend actual fraud? Patricia pulled out the photographs of Ashley meeting with the divorce attorney, time-stamped just 3 weeks after her wedding to David. David, these meetings occurred while you were still on your honeymoon in Hawaii. This wasn't a mistake or an impulse decision. This was premeditated fraud executed with careful planning over several years. The timeline made Ashley's deception even more chilling. While David had been celebrating their marriage and planning their future together, Ashley had already been consulting lawyers about how to maximize her take in the divorce she was planning to file as soon as she could access significant assets. "What exactly do we say to her?" David asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "We present the evidence systematically and give her 2 choices," Patricia replied. "She can sign divorce papers waiving all claims to marital property, agree to pay back her hidden debts herself and leave quietly, or we can file criminal charges and let the court system handle the situation." We drove to David and Ashley's apartment in separate cars, Patricia following in her sedan, while David and I rode together in tense silence. The apartment complex was one of those modern developments that looked expensive but felt sterile, all glass and steel without character or warmth. Ashley had insisted on the upgrade from their previous modest place, claiming they deserved to live somewhere that reflected their success. Ashley answered the door wearing designer workout clothes that probably cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget. Her smile faltered when she saw Patricia behind us, clearly recognizing that this wasn't a social visit. "David, honey, why didn't you tell me you were bringing company?" Her voice carried forced cheerfulness, but her eyes darted between the 3 of us with growing concern. "We need to talk, Ashley. All of us, together, right now." David's voice was steadier than I'd expected, though I could see his hands trembling slightly as he spoke. The apartment's living room was decorated with furniture that Ashley must have bought with credit cards, everything expensive and pristine, but somehow lacking the warmth that comes from pieces chosen with love rather than status in mind. She gestured for us to sit, but Patricia remained standing, her briefcase positioned prominently on the coffee table. "Ashley, my name is Patricia Morgan. I'm Robert's attorney, and I'm here because we've discovered some serious discrepancies in the information you've provided to this family about your background and intentions." Ashley's face went pale beneath her carefully applied makeup, but she maintained her composure with the skill of someone accustomed to lying under pressure. "I don't understand what you mean. What kind of discrepancies?" Patricia opened her briefcase and began laying out documents with the precision of a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. Let's start with your employment history. You told David and his family that you worked in marketing, but according to these employment records, you've never held a marketing position.
In fact, you were terminated from 3 different retail positions for theft. That's not true, Ashley protested, but her voice lacked conviction. Someone's obviously made a mistake with those records. No mistake, Patricia continued, placing bank statements on the coffee table. These are your credit card statements showing over $60,000 in debt that you've hidden from your husband. Debt that was accumulated before your marriage and has continued growing throughout your marriage. David stared at the statements with growing horror, seeing charges for luxury items in expensive restaurants that Ashley had claimed were paid for by friends or work bonuses. Ashley, what is this? Why do you have all this debt? Instead of answering David's question, Ashley turned her attention to me, her expression shifting from defensive to aggressively manipulative. Robert, I don't know why you're doing this to your son's marriage, but David and I are happy together. We love each other, and we're building a future that your interference is trying to destroy. The only thing being destroyed here is the web of lies you've built around my son, I replied, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. Ashley, we know about your meetings with divorce attorneys. We know you were planning to leave David from the moment you married him. Patricia placed the surveillance photographs on the table, each one clearly showing Ashley entering and leaving the law offices of Mills, Bradford & Associates, specialist in high-asset divorce cases. The timestamps were damning, showing regular meetings beginning just days after the wedding and continuing monthly throughout the marriage. Ashley stared at the photographs with the expression of someone watching their carefully constructed world collapse in real time. When she looked up, the mask of innocence had been replaced by something much harder and more calculating. So what if I consulted some lawyers? Every smart wife protects herself legally. That doesn't prove anything except that I'm not naive about marriage. It proves you married David under false pretenses with the intention of defrauding them and his family, Patricia stated calmly. Combined with the identity fraud regarding your employment history and the concealment of massive debt, this constitutes criminal behavior punishable by significant prison time. The word prison seemed to penetrate Ashley's defenses in a way that the evidence hadn't. For the first time since we'd arrived, she looked genuinely frightened rather than just cornered. David had been sitting in stunned silence, processing the magnitude of his wife's deception, but now he found his voice again. Ashley, is any of it real? Did you ever love me, or was I just a target from the beginning? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with pain and the desperate hope that some part of their relationship had been genuine. Ashley looked at her husband with something that might have been regret, but when she spoke, her words destroyed even that small possibility. David, you're a sweet man, but you're not exactly ambitious. I needed security, and your family had money. I thought I could make it work between us, but honestly, you're just not exciting enough to build a real life with. The cruelty of her response was breathtaking in its casual dismissal of 4 years of David's love and devotion. I watched my son's face crumble as he realized that everything he'd believed about his marriage had been an elaborate performance designed to separate him from his inheritance. So the investment property, the urgent deadline, the demand for $500,000, I said, none of it was real? Oh, the debt is real enough, Ashley replied with bitter honesty. And I do need money to start over somewhere else. I just figured it was easier to get it from you than to wait for David's inheritance or drag things out in divorce court. Patricia made notes on her legal pad, documenting Ashley's admissions for potential use in criminal proceedings. Ashley, you've just confessed to marriage fraud, attempted theft by deception, and identity fraud.
I strongly recommend you consider our settlement offer before this situation becomes a matter for law enforcement. What settlement offer? Patricia pulled out a prepared document, placing it on the coffee table next to the evidence of Ashley's crimes. You signed divorce papers waiving all claims to marital property. You agreed to take responsibility for your own debts without involving David, and you leave Ohio within 30 days.
In exchange, we don't file criminal charges that could result in years of prison time." Ashley read through the document quickly, her expression growing more desperate as she realized the limited options available to her. "And if I refuse?" "Then we file criminal charges tomorrow morning, and you can explain your actions to a judge and jury. Marriage fraud carries a potential sentence of up to 10 years in federal prison." The apartment fell silent, except for the ticking of an expensive clock that Ashley had probably bought with one of her hidden credit cards. David sat with his head in his hands, mourning the death of a marriage that had never really existed. I found myself thinking of Helen, wishing she could see how her careful preparation was finally protecting our family from the predator she'd identified so clearly. Ashley picked up a pen from the coffee table, staring at it as if it represented the end of her carefully planned scheme to defraud my family. "If I sign this, what guarantee do I have that you won't press charges anyway?" "You have my word as an officer of the court," Patricia replied. "As long as you comply with all terms of the agreement and leave the state as specified, no criminal charges will be filed." Ashley looked around the expensive apartment one last time, then at David, who couldn't bring himself to meet her eyes. With shaking hands, she signed the divorce papers that would free my son from the biggest mistake of his life. "I'll be gone by the end of the week," she said quietly, all the fight drained out of her voice. As we prepared to leave, David stood and faced his soon-to-be ex-wife one final time. "Ashley, I hope you find whatever it is you're really looking for. But I'm grateful I found out who you really are before you could destroy my father along with our marriage." Outside the apartment complex, David broke down completely, all the emotions he'd been suppressing finally overwhelming him. I held my grown son as he cried for the loss of the life he'd thought he was building, and the woman he'd thought he'd married. "Dad, how do I ever trust anyone again? How do I know if someone really loves me, or just sees me as a way to get to our family's money?" The question broke my heart because I didn't have a good answer. Ashley's betrayal would leave scars that might never fully heal. But at least David was free to find someone who would love him for himself rather than for what he could provide. "You take it one day at a time, son, and you remember that your mother loved you enough to protect you even after she was gone. Real love exists. You just have to be wiser about recognizing it." 3 months later, I sat in my kitchen on a crisp December morning, reading a letter from David while snow fell gently outside my window. He'd moved back to Riverside temporarily, renting a small apartment downtown while he rebuilt his life and figured out his next steps. The letter was part of his weekly updates, a new tradition that had emerged from the ashes of his marriage. "Dad, I started seeing a counselor like you suggested. It's helping me understand how I missed so many warning signs with Ashley. The counselor says I was so eager to be loved that I ignored red flags that should have been obvious. I'm learning to trust my instincts again, slowly but surely." Patricia Morgan had called the week before to inform me that Ashley had indeed left Ohio as required by the settlement agreement. The private investigator she'd hired to monitor compliance reported that Ashley had moved to Las Vegas, Nevada, apparently targeting a new circle of wealthy potential victims. Some people, Patricia observed, never learn from their mistakes. The divorce had been finalized in November, with Ashley receiving absolutely nothing from the marriage except the clothes she could fit in her car. Her credit card debt remained her own responsibility, and David was finally free from the financial obligations she'd accumulated through years of deception. He'd even recovered some personal items she'd tried to claim, including his grandmother's engagement ring that she'd been planning to sell. Frank Williams knocked on my door that afternoon, bringing a bottle of wine and his usual neighborly concern. We sat in my living room, the same space where Ashley had made her outrageous demand for $500,000, though it felt cleaner now, somehow purified by the truth that had finally emerged. "Bob, I have to say, you handled that whole situation better than most men would have. Standing up to family takes real courage,
especially when they're trying to manipulate you through guilt and obligation. I thought about Helen's envelope, still locked in my desk drawer along with all the evidence of Ashley's deception. My wife's posthumous protection had saved not just my financial security, but David's entire future from a predator who'd targeted our family with calculated precision. Frank, I had help from someone who saw the danger long before I did. Helen knew Ashley was trouble from the beginning, but she was smart enough to gather proof instead of just making accusations that could have driven David away. That woman always was sharp as a tack. She saw through people in ways that amazed me. Frank raised his wine glass in a small salute. To Helen, for protecting her family even from beyond the grave. Dorothy Kim stopped by later that evening with a casserole and news that the Martinez family had decided to move to a larger house across town. The neighborhood was changing, but slowly, with new families bringing children and energy to streets that had grown quiet over the years. Robert, I hope you don't mind me saying, but you look happier than you have since Helen passed. There's something different in your eyes, more at peace. She was right. The confrontation with Ashley had awakened something in me that had been dormant since Helen's death. Not anger exactly, but a renewed sense of my own worth and the importance of protecting what mattered most. I'd spent 2 years feeling like a relic, a lonely old man whose best days were behind him. Now I felt like a protector, a guardian of family values and hard-earned security. David joined me for Christmas dinner, the first holiday we'd shared since Ashley had entered our lives. He helped me cook Helen's traditional menu, reading from her handwritten recipe cards and sharing memories of Christmases past. The house felt alive again, filled with conversation and laughter instead of the silence that had become my constant companion. "Dad, I want you to know something," David said as we cleaned dishes together after dinner. "I'm grateful for what happened, even though it was painful. If Ashley had succeeded in getting that money from you, she would have disappeared with it, and I would have spent years blaming you for not supporting my marriage. Instead, I learned who she really was before she could destroy both of us." We spent the evening looking through photo albums from David's childhood, remembering the boy who'd helped me with electrical projects and built snow forts in the backyard. That boy had grown into a man who'd made a serious mistake in judgment, but he was learning from it with the wisdom that comes from surviving betrayal and discovering inner strength. "What are your plans for the new year?" I asked as David prepared to leave. "I'm thinking about going back to school, maybe getting my teaching certificate. I've always liked working with kids, and after everything that's happened, I want to do something meaningful with my life." He paused at the door, looking back at the house where he'd grown up. "Dad, would it be okay if I came by more often? I feel like I wasted years trying to impress Ashley instead of maintaining the relationships that actually mattered." "David, this is your home. You're welcome here anytime, for as long as you need."
After he left, I sat in Helen's sewing room, surrounded by her unfinished projects and the memories of our 40 years together. The envelope that had changed everything lay on her sewing table, empty now, but still precious as proof of her enduring love and protection. I picked up one of Helen's quilting patterns, a complex design she'd been planning to make for our bedroom. The fabric was still there, carefully selected and organized, waiting for hands that would never finish the work. But maybe David could learn to quilt. Maybe we could complete Helen's final project together, creating something beautiful from pieces she'd chosen with love. Outside, snow continued to fall on Maple Street, covering the familiar neighborhood in pristine white. The house settled around me with comfortable creaks and sighs, the sounds of a home that had weathered storms and emerged stronger. My retirement savings remained intact, my security assured, my family protected from those who would exploit our generosity. Patricia had suggested that I update my will to include stronger protections against future manipulation, and I'd agreed to meet with her after the holidays. Helen's experience with Ashley had taught us both the importance of legal safeguards in an age when family relationships could be complicated by greed and deception.
But tonight, sitting in the warm glow of Helen's reading lamp, I felt only gratitude for the woman who'd loved me enough to protect me from beyond the grave, and hope for the son who was finally free to build a life based on truth rather than lies. The envelope had contained more than evidence of Ashley's deception. It had contained Helen's final gift to our family, the truth that set us free. The story was over, but the healing had just begun. And for the first time in 3 years, I was looking forward to tomorrow. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.